Welcome, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us this evening. We'll get started in just a moment here. My name is Thomas Peterson, and I am a field organizer working with Audubon Arkansas this spring on our campaign for solar access. And thank you for joining us for this conversation on solar access in Arkansas this evening. If you haven't yet signed our petition to protect solar energy in Arkansas this legislative session, you can find a link to do so in the chat momentarily. So that link will be there, and feel free to share that as well. And I want to start by sharing a few best practices for Zoom. If you'd like to ask a question or make a comment, you can type something in the chat using the chat bubble icon at the bottom of your screen. And we'll have a Q&A later in the meeting. So feel free to send in questions as they arise, and we'll address them during the Q&A. And also, as we begin here, please introduce yourself in the chat and tell us where you are calling in from this evening. And folks can say hi to each other that way. But as we get started here, I want to just run through our agenda for the next hour. So we're going to begin with a panel, a conversation on solar access in Arkansas from the perspective of schools, small businesses, and nonprofits. And you'll be introduced to our panelists in just a moment. And then after that, we'll go through a solar policy update on the 2021 Arkansas legislative session, the relevant bills. And then we'll have time for questions and answers, both to the panelists and also on our policy update. And then we'll have a final opportunity at the end of the meeting to take action to protect solar access and figure out how you can get involved in these issues. And having gone through the agenda here, I'd like to introduce Brent Newman, who's the Senior Policy Director for Audubon's work in Arkansas, Mississippi, and Louisiana, who will moderate our panel and introduce our guest speakers. So over to you, Brent.
Sounds good, Thomas. Thank you. And a lot of thanks to Thomas for kicking off this evening's panel. I've got to say we've been doing a lot of webinars over the past year with COVID being the way it is, and learning a new way to interact with each other and share facts about the conservation work that we're doing on the ground. And I've got to say tonight is one that I am extremely excited about. I think you all are really going to enjoy hearing from these speakers. No? Got a lot. You're going to enjoy this panel. I think we've got 3 speakers y'all are really going to enjoy. And then Gary Moody, of course, is going to give us a policy update. So I'm going to very briefly introduce our 3 panelists. And excuse me for reading, but I've got 3 very brief bios here. Dr. Michael Hester has been the superintendent of the Batesville School District since 2017. He was previously the general director of the secondary schools with Topeka Public Schools, which served 15,000 students. And before that, he spent 23 years as a high school principal in Kansas. In 2018, he initiated Arkansas's largest energy waste reduction initiative and the state's first school district solar panel project, a project that has allowed the district to give its teachers raises of up to $15,000. Next on our panel is Joe Fox. He's the president of CBI Investments, and he's the former owner of Community Bakery, where he installed solar back in 2018, a solar installation that CBI Investments continues to own and manage. He is currently working to develop a community solar center that would serve 7 small businesses in the Selma area, as well as a couple of downtown Little Rock churches. And Uta Meyer is the center manager for the Little Rock Audubon Center, where she develops and implements environmental education programs and activities for K-12 students and the general public. She joined Audubon Arkansas in February 2013, and she has worked with Scenic Hill Solar to install a solar facility and a solar learning lab, which is making Audubon Arkansas the first 100% renewable powered nonprofit in the state. So that is our fantastic panel. I'm really excited for you all to hear their story and to learn more about how they got involved in the wild and wacky world of solar. So we're going to get this started, and I'm going to just cycle through our panelists and get some answers to some introductory questions. So we'll kick it off with Michael, and then we'll go to Uta and then to Joe. But the first big question, so as an owner, operator, employee of a school district, a nonprofit environmental organization, and then a bakery, what made you first decide to look into solar as something appropriate for your facility or for your business? And we'll kick it off with Michael.
Okay, I believe I'm off the mic. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay. Well, And when I was hired at Batesville Schools in 2017 to become the superintendent, we met with our school board and we went through a goal setting session. And we set 4 goals. One was student achievement. One was to attract and retain teachers because we were the worst in the area for paying teachers and we were losing teachers. And the second was to create efficiencies and partnerships because we knew that would take money to do the things we'd set out to do. So we needed efficiencies and partnership. So under efficiencies, we had a company come out and give us an energy audit. And then they introduced us as well to not only saving money on the inefficiencies we had, but taking maybe an offensive plan where let's go make some money and install solar panels. And so we put some numbers together and they created a plan. We showed them our vision. And so ultimately our solar panels and all of our other efficiencies allowed us to this year, we've passed record, 2 out of 3 years we've passed record raises for this district, Batesville School District, in its 100+ years of existence have never been at the state average in teacher salaries. And not only have we gone from worst to first in our area, but we're now in the upper quartile or upper half of the state for teachers starting teacher pay. And we've even extended in Arkansas, they only allow up to 15 years experience. We expanded even to 25 years of experience and degrees. So we're excited. It's anywhere from $4,000 to $15,000 for each teacher per year. And that has been very exciting for us because this is a people business, and to put students first, it starts with attracting and retaining teachers.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Michael. Uta, could you give us your perspective on how you guys got into solar and where that sort of impetus came from?
Sure. Evening, everybody. So anyone that's familiar with Audubon knows that everything we do connects back to birds, right? So Audubon Arkansas was founded in 2000. The Little Rock Audubon Center was opened in 2010. And throughout those periods of time, we spend time advocating for smart policies that benefit birds. We encourage folks to take individual actions that benefit birds. We educate about all those things to kids, families, and the general public. And we're really eager to walk the talk and actually implement solar in an effort to be a organization, a facility that's taking some action and doing all we can. So once things kind of turned around, we were able to do that. That was really, really important for us to walk the talk and lead by example. In addition to that, anyone that's not familiar with Little Rock Audubon Center, it's actually located in the Granite Mountain community on the east side of town in Little Rock. It's a historic African-American community, historically underserved. And, solar is not something that you necessarily see in a community like that. It's still a technology that is not as equitable as it should be. So for us, being able to install that and show this is something that is an opportunity for everyone, I think was another really important piece and something that we wanted to elevate and highlight. And we're excited to be able to do that.
Awesome, thank you. So we've heard from the school district, we've heard from a environmental nonprofit. Now we're going to kick it over to Joe to give us the small business owner perspective.
I think Joe might be having some technical difficulties, so let's circle back to him.
All right, can do. So Michael, you already talked a little bit about this and sort of got to these talking points, but as far as how the installation of solar in Batesville has impacted your employees, you spoke a little bit about being able to give your teachers a raise. Could you talk a little bit more about that?
Yes. When we started with our teachers, we'd asked them to be on board with us because, when you spend money and they see solar panels going up, they automatically think, well, they're wasting money again. And so, it took a little faith for folks to believe us when we said, look, if you'll go these efficiency moves with us and we'll put these solar panels up, it will translate to money. And so the challenge was, people see these things going up, they see money being spent, but they haven't seen it. And so making sure we followed up on our promise that we would take this money and put it to teacher salaries we put it out there, and our board, I've got to tell you about everything. We couldn't do any of this without our board stepping up and wanting this to happen. I had a board member say, I've talked to other board members who were on the board, and they said, we should have done something for the teachers, something that would have lasted for their lives and would have made an impact directly on the kind of teachers and the quality of teachers our kids made. That would have been perfect. And so our board members said, we are not going to miss this opportunity to impact our students by making sure we attract and retain quality teachers. And now, we were averaging 25 to 30 teachers a year that in our school system. We've got about 250 teachers, and we were losing about 25 to 30 of them. And this year we've got, I think, three retirements, and a couple of teachers their husband moved, but it's single digits. And so it's working in that we not only are retaining them, but when we put applications out now, we're up 100% on the apps we get what wants to come here. So it's working, and we're excited because that's how we put students first.
And I've just got to say, I met Michael virtually with Thomas for the first time on Tuesday, and I think it's pretty obvious to anyone who hears him speak about the school district. His passion and his enthusiasm for the teachers and the students shines through. So not only working on a panel like this one or speaking around Arkansas, but Lauren has dropped in the chat a link to a story on CBS News earlier this week talking about the success of this. And I've also seen a couple of other news coverages from the Kelly Clarkson show to local news to regional news. So this is something that people are talking about. This is something people are excited about. So it's been fun to learn the story of Batesville. So our friend Joe has joined us. Joe, we're gonna go back a question for you just so you can catch up to the panel discussion. Could you talk a little bit about the decision you made to install solar at Community Bakery and what the impacts were of the business?
Okay, sorry for the technical difficulties getting on, but of course, one of the main motivations on the front end was just to reduce the carbon footprint of Community Bakery, and that's primary. But I've had an interest in solar for a long time. Actually, before it was front and center as a climate change issue. When I first came back to Arkansas in the early 1980s, I worked with Bill Ball, who is considered by many to be the father of solar here in Arkansas. And back then it was more about solar hot water than it was about solar electricity. But shortly after I worked with him, I ended up buying Community Bakery, and for the next 36 years, I was pretty well consumed by trying to run that operation. But in the meantime, Bill was responsible for getting, played a big role anyway, in getting net metering and aggregate metering here in Arkansas. And that piqued my interest, and I thought about many times about doing a remote solar site and aggregating the net meter out there with the meters here at the operating site for Community Bakery, but I just could never quite, carve out enough time to do it. And then, in fall of 2018, when I was away on vacation, someone approached me and said, hey, you could install solar on your roof and fold it into that historic rehab you're doing on your buildings and get the state tax credit for that as well. So that piqued my interest, and they put me in touch with Seal Solar, and Seal came over, made a impressive presentation, and the main thing for me was that they could do a turnkey installation because, again, time was just a critical factor in my day-to-day life. And so I worked with them, and 2 months later, we were quote unquote baking with solar, as I like to say back then. So it's been very successful. The benefits, again, to start off, it reduces the carbon footprint of Community Bakery. But, beyond that, we get a lot of course, there's a savings involved, and that was one of the things I spent the most time on before I actually pulled the lever to say, go ahead and do this, was to analyze what the rate of return would be on this investment. And I can say what the savings is what finishes. But we've got a lot of positive feedback from customers. We put a picture of our roof with 102 solar panels on it, and put that caption, now baking with solar. But we also had a lot of positive feedback from employees who like working for an organization that's powered by solar, and at least in part. We've had nearby businesses, other tenants in our building that have spoken favorably, and I'd like to say even one of the homeless folks who hangs around made a point of telling me how cool he thought it was. So a lot of benefits.
That's awesome, Joe. Thank you. I'll say I would be one of the first people to buy a community bakery with solar T-shirt. So it's a catchy slogan. So going for some of the ways that solar's benefited you guys and how you got into it, let's talk a little bit about the challenges of installing solar, and we'll kick it off going to Uta. So in getting solar and having that installed at your facility, what were some of the challenges you faced getting that accomplished?
Yeah, to start off, we needed something like the Solar Access Act to actually pass in Arkansas. So we needed that legislation to make our solar facility happen. Without third-party leasing, this would not have been an economic option for us as a nonprofit. We're part of National Audubon Society. We're a state office. We're a local center. Our budget is small and our budget is tight. So that is something that we needed to make that option for us. And I think Scenic Hill would probably say that the rock in Granite Mountain that's in the ground was a significant challenge into getting that solar up and going. But I think that we need the legislation to pass. We need that to happen. And that was the main hurdle. And it passed in 2019 and we started the process in 2019. So once that challenge was overcome, we were ready to go. And COVID was a speed bump, but we're there now. So it's good stuff. Very exciting.
Awesome. Thank you. Michael, could you talk from your perspective about some of the challenges in getting the solar installed and making it work for your facility?
Certainly on the federal level, they have tax credits for investors so that when schools like ours take out a $5.4 million bond issue, there has to be someone there who's willing to buy those bonds. And they started off with those incentives being like at 28%, and then they go down each year to like 22%, and then they quit offering them. So we needed that to happen on the federal level. We needed the great state of Arkansas's legislative bills like Act 464 to be involved, where school districts could pass that bond issue without having to go to the taxpayers, because the payments would be guaranteed through the savings. And that is so big for districts to have that. So we were so thankful that 464 got through, and that not only did that happen, but then the Public Service Commission, once we started this, at first you had to own your solar field. So we own our solar fields and our solar canopy, but now they've modified that where you can go third party and just lease. And you can even partner with someone to make your project even bigger, because through the bigger volume, you get more savings in the kilowatts that you produce. So that's all important in the legislation. And then, you get a good thing going and a lot of people jump on it, or there are people who are used to getting this money, and to keep it where nonprofits like ourselves, churches, governments, city, county, hospitals, school districts, nonprofits need to be able to use this. And there are people who's been able to get money off of it. Like for instance, in Tennessee, my sister and them they won't put solar on their houses because they're not guaranteed that the company will buy that back from them. So we have laws set up and then protecting those laws. Once people find out, once powerful people find out that their money is being siphoned off to nonprofits, you have a move of political folks trying to change laws or get legislators who will vote for them to do these things. Our Public Service Commission stepped up and made it to where it stays consistent for us. So we need the feds to keep the tax credits going so people will buy these bonds. We need our state legislators to keep these laws on the books, and we need the Public Service Commission to keep fending off the attacks of the progress we've made.
Thank you, Michael. So a theme that seems to be emerging is that, to allow this to happen, the hurdles you have to hop over. One is you have to have the enabling legislation, something that allows this sort of thing to happen. And then secondly, you have to have a reliability of that sort of schematic and the way that it operates. So Joe, from your perspective, small business owner, what are the obstacles in getting it up and going, and how do you ensure that it keeps going for years to come? Gotcha muted there, Joe.
Sorry, you hear me now? Yeah, okay. We didn't have some of the obstacles that Michael and Uta referred to, just being a kind of a commercial installation. But we were certainly threatened by the loss of the one-to-one net metering, and that was very important for the PSC to reinforce that would stay in place for installations of our size, because that was obviously what we were banking on when we did our financial calculations on the front end before deciding to go ahead with this. And if the financial return changed after we'd already made the decision, that would have been a big impairment. So, we had some minor, what shall I say, physical issues. We didn't have to worry about driving stakes in the ground or mounting fixtures in the ground, but we put these panels on the top of a roof, so we're concerned about the weight on the roof and so on. To have them come in and around the support space, be sure it would support it. And even then I was a little bit nervous because it wasn't just the weight of the panels. I had just put a new roof on, and we weren't going to penetrate the roof with 2,000 penetration, so they did a weighted, I forget the proper term, but anyway, long and short of it is the panels are weighted down up there, the mounting brackets are. So, but it survived the weight of the extra snow recently, so I'm breathing a sigh of relief. Then you have a few little odds and ends issues. It took Entergy a few billing cycles to kind of sort out the net metering part. In fact, it came out to my benefit, the mistakes they made, but of course I pointed it out to them and they corrected that and charged me back. Anyway, we didn't have any big obstacles, honestly. Seal Solar did an excellent job, and as I mentioned, it was a turnkey installation.
So that's a pretty interesting facet of the way that solar policy works for small business owners, I think, and people who are running a facility. Joe and Michael and Uta are all looking at how they're going to operate for 10, 20, a couple of decades potentially. But changes to solar policy could happen as easily as every 2 years with the legislature or in the PSC. So it's something we as advocates for solar have to be sort of vigilant about. So talking now, that said, that reliability in policy is important, and knowing what the future is going to look like to a certain extent is important. Do you have any changes in Arkansas solar policy that you would recommend, or things that a tweak that could be made, or some improvements you would make it easier for other people to enter the market? We'll start off with Michael.
Yes, what I would ask is that for nonprofits right now, when we first started, they only let you have 750 kilowatts. And they've modified the law to 1 meg now that you can produce. And they've also let you have partners to create a field. What I would ask is that they would let the nonprofits determine how to get to net zero. where you're not paying anything for your utilities and you can have that money then back in your budget. Right now, we are petitioning that we want another 2 or 3 megs to be able to produce. We are at 50% of our bills now. We want to get to net zero. So we are trying to lobby and work with people where folks like us can get to net zero on our net metering and the benefits of it.
Really interesting, Michael. Thank you. Joe, from your perspective, what do you think could be helped here?
Well, I'm actually focused on an issue right now related to state policy, and that is related to the how solar installations are taxed for property tax purposes. And the problem there is that it's not clear. There's no clarity or consistency across the state in how counties are assessing the value of solar installations. So I'm working with my local state rep and hopefully some other state legislators to get a law or a bill that would clarify how that's done. In fact, the bill was just filed a couple of days ago. It's House Bill 1751, and I won't kind of bore everyone with the details of it. It's actually a pretty simple matter, but nevertheless, there are some issues surrounding property tax because it can make a big financial impact in the in the outcome of the project. And the problem is, as I say, that some counties aren't picking up any assessment on a new solar installation, and others are doing assessments that don't really reflect the financial reality of the situation. So this may sound like a small issue, but actually it's big over time, and it's one of those kind of after the fact costs that oftentimes aren't thought about on the front end. And I came to this focus through my experience with my community bakery installation, when a year after I did the installation, I got a reassessment from the Pulaski County assessor, bumping up the value of my real estate. And again, it wasn't particularly realistic, and I had to go before the Board of Equalization, and certainly I got it fixed mostly, but there's still some other issues related to this matter.
So it sounds like from both of you, fellows, it seems like some tweaks that would make it easier for people to understand the playing field a little bit better, probably allow more people to get in the game and put solar on their facility. So from your perspective, what changes would you see in solar policy? It may be too early since we haven't really turned it on yet.
Well, I think I want to echo what Michael was speaking to about the limits for nonprofits. Our facility is much, much smaller than what you're dealing with there. But I think, I think if you kind of twist the question a little bit, we deal a lot with the advocating for solar policy, advocating for clean energy policy for birds and for people. I think what the Solar Access Act did back in 2019 has certainly broadened the group of stakeholders for solar policy, right? And I think something that we can all go and do is speak to the nonprofits, whether it's schools or churches or what have you, that we deal with in our day-to-day lives, and say like, hey, you may not be thinking about this right now, but look at what's happening in the legislature. You should advocate for this, because you don't know, in 5 years, this may be an option for you. You might be interested. Support and help out the groups that are like you, the facilities that are like you, that are utilizing this for really good reasons, right? So I think encouraging everybody to really be aware of who could benefit from this and who has a stake and who can have a voice to really amplify what is needed for the future, not only to protect solar access, but to expand it.
Awesome. That's a great point. So we've got about 4 minutes left in our open panel session. So I'm going to wrap it up with one final question before we kick it over to Mr. Moody. So you guys have seen some of the ups and downs of the policy making. You've seen how the sausage got made, and you made the decision to install solar. What advice would you give to a peer organization similar to yours that was thinking about putting solar panels in and taking advantage of the Solar Access Act? And we'll start off with Michael.
Well, I would tell anyone in my position that for a superintendent and a school board, you must have the right partner. And for us, that was Integrity. Integrity is a subsidiary of Nabholz Construction, which is one of the oldest and most solid companies in Arkansas. And so we knew when we talked about a 20-year process of our funding and how we were doing things, that they'd be around, and we did our homework on them. They walk the walk. They don't just talk the talk. There are a lot of folks out there who will promise you a lot of things and say a lot of things, but and in our case, Integrity walked the walk. They guaranteed our bills and our numbers would hit their numbers to show our savings, or they'd write us a check and make the difference. And so my advice is make sure your partner is everything that takes you through this process of building them and in maintaining them and making sure your numbers that they did give you in your audit are correct and that they'll be there 20 years from now when you need them.
That's good advice, Michael. Joe, from your perspective, what would you tell someone on the line who's thinking about solar from a business?
Well, I guess the first thing I'd say is just go for it. But, I think I referenced the fact that finding the time to actually choose to do this and look into it and get it up and running was one of my biggest obstacles on the front end. And so I certainly echo what Michael said. Finding the right partner is going to be critical. But I'm actually working on a community solar development that would hopefully make it easier for small businesses like Community Bakery, when I was the owner, to actually get involved in solar, where you'd have it's like basically a partner organization. A commercial enterprise could lease a section of a community solar development, a larger community solar development that is sort of aggregating together 8 or 10 other users to get a big enough facility to build something with some economy of scale. But you'd also have this entity that made it possible for you to basically just lease a section of a community solar center, and then you don't have to worry about the maintenance. You don't have to worry about. In this case, we guarantee you that you'd pay 5% less than what your energy bill is. So you don't have to do that financial analysis to be sure to convince yourself that it really is a good return on investment. You don't have an investment. You don't have any investment in financial assets. So I think you're going to see more community solar in Arkansas, and that's what I'm kind of excited about. And I think it will offer a simpler way for small commercial and even nonprofit organizations to get involved with. The group that we're putting together has a couple of churches in it, and they face the same things that Uta and Michael have brought up with regard to not being able to take advantage of the tax credits. So the entity that owns the community solar center, will reap that benefit, but then guarantee to those nonprofits the savings that they need to count on. But of course, I think everybody who's doing this is doing it primarily because of the greater environmental impact.
All right, thank you, Joe. And finally, wrapping this up, it's for a bird enthusiast conservation organization. That's a great place to work. What was your advice?
Not biased at all, right, Brent? Also Audubon employee. No, so advice for other nonprofits, I think, something that we made sure to do on the front end, partially because it's required by National Audubon, but also because it's a good thing to do, is we went through, an RFP, request for proposals process. And I think even if you're a small nonprofit, it's a good maybe a boring detail to focus on, but I think it's a good thing, good exercise to go through. We formed a committee with internal and external expertise that could kind of help guide us in our decision making, weigh the pros and cons. And I think that's a really good exercise to go through for anyone, and something that really helped us, I think, make the right decision for our facility and for our project. I think, in addition to that, there's this discussion happening now. There've been some in the past, there'll be more in the future. More and more folks are installing this, ask questions, have conversations, because you also need patience, if I didn't mention that. It's a big deal, but there are now folks that have installed it, and they can kind of help guide you through the process and answer questions and be helpful. So anyone looking to do this in the nonprofit world should definitely take advantage of churches, folks like Audubon, other groups that have installed it and kind of gone through the process and had some learnings along the way.
Thank you. So now before we go to a Q&A session, we're gonna hear from Gary Moody on the policy landscape and what's happened in the legislature over the past couple of months. But just a reminder for folks if you have questions you'd like to hear during the Q&A session, drop those in the chat, and we'll try to make sure we account for everyone's question. I'm going to kick it over to Gary Moody, who has been called the Obi-Wan Kenobi of Arkansas solar policy.
Only by you, Brent. No, I appreciate that. Well, every day the session changes, y'all. If we'd had this call last night, I would have said that we felt very confident that there were no significant threats to the Solar Access Act looming this session. But as of this morning, Representative Fight and Senator Mark Johnson filed a piece of legislation, House Bill 1787, that would completely gut the progress that we made in passing the Solar Access Act in 2019. Before I get into the details of that legislation, when we passed the Solar Access Act in 2019, we did it with an overwhelming bipartisan majority in both the House and the Senate. And in the 2 years that we've had that law in the books, it's worked tremendously well, as you've heard tonight. Not only, our guests that shared with us tonight, but I noticed that Central Arkansas Water's on the call. They're planning a large solar installation that will save all their folks, all their ratepayers money, and countless businesses. We tallied it up, and $500 million of investment has been made in Arkansas and solar over the last 2 years. Tremendous amount. And our rate moved from 43rd in the country to 25th in the country in solar deployment over that time. But yet, there are those who would like to see us go backwards. And so I do want to alert everyone to this legislation. Audubon will be fighting it tooth and nail to make sure it doesn't pass. Amongst other things, it would overrule the net metering ruling recently issued by the Public Service Commission and legislatively set rates for net metering customers, dropping the compensation for any electricity fed back to the grid at any time, not just netted over the course of a month, but at any time you're producing more than you're using at that moment. They would separately meter those two flows. They would charge you the full retail rate, about 10 to 11 cents, depending on where you are, for any energy you consumed on one channel. On a second channel, they would compensate you for any solar you export to the grid at any time at their avoided cost rate, which hovers around 3 cents a kilowatt hour. So we're talking about a drastic devaluation for solar customers. It would absolutely make it very difficult for projects to be economic at scale in Arkansas were it to pass. Essentially what the legislation does is it gets rid of the concept of net metering and instead treats every solar customer as if they were a merchant generator bidding their power into the market, which we feel is wholly unfair. Worse than that, it specifically would eliminate or prohibit any off-site net metering. So projects like the one that Joe was talking about would not be allowed. It closes the door on community solar. It would prohibit meter aggregation, so customers who have multiple meters scattered across various locations wouldn't be able to offset all of those bills at one location with one solar installation. There's just a whole host of things, and we're still digesting the bill because it was just filed today. It has been referred to the House Committee, Insurance and Commerce Committee. So certainly look that committee up. And if you have a member that your representative on that committee, on the House or Senate side, please reach out to them and urge them to oppose this legislation, because it would be very, very costly. And just right now, projects in the queue waiting on the Public Service Commission to approve them, there's $150 million of projects. That's investment in communities, that's jobs, and that's a lot of environmental benefit that would be squandered were this legislation to move forward. So obviously we're going to be fully against this legislation and would urge you to do everything you can do to help us on that. More information soon. If you haven't, there'll be opportunities. I think we shared at the chat earlier to sign our petition. That's the best way to stay informed about what's going on as these things move and develop. And we will send actions, things you can do to help make sure that this bill doesn't become law. On the good news side, and what I actually plan to talk about tonight until midday today, is there a number of positive solar bills that are working their way through the legislature at various stages. One, Mr. Fox told you about already, House Bill 1751, a very smart piece of legislation addressing a real issue for anybody who wants to install solar, in coming up with a standardized and appropriate method for valuation of solar for property tax purposes, and reasonable depreciation on that asset. There's another one, House Bill 1628, that's a piece of bipartisan legislation in front of the Revenue and Tax Committee, that would add qualifying solar equipment to the sales tax exemption list in Arkansas. If you've never looked at the sales tax exemption list in Arkansas, there's about 87 things on it, for a whole gamut of reasons. But we feel like this is a good opportunity to help folks install solar. We know that it creates jobs, and that's usually the justification folks use when seeking these kinds of tax carve-outs. The other thing that our installers rightly brought to our attention is that the utilities already have an exemption, a sales tax exemption, when they build generation facilities. So they view it as a fairness and equality issue that distributed energy resource owners should benefit in the same way. And we agree. A couple of bills that have not yet been introduced, but that we are actively working on. We've got a great bipartisan conversation happening right now on a net zero task force bill that we expect will be introduced. It would set up a working group to work between this session and the next to explore Arkansas's clean energy transition to net zero by 2050 and what that would mean and what steps should be taken in what order to minimize the cost and encourage that transition. And another bill not yet introduced, but a lot of good discussions, and we have a solid draft on, is a carbon intensity tracking and reporting bill. Very straightforward. It would just require all existing utilities, electric utilities, to report the carbon intensity of their electricity generation, so that folks that do choose to go solar or to offset with clean energy know how much carbon they're saving, right? How much are you offsetting in a year? The only way to know that is to know the carbon intensity of what you're replacing. So those bills are all bills that we're going to be supporting, and hopefully we'll be able to get at least one or two of them across the finish line this session. And we'll certainly have some great conversations get started along the way that will move us in the right direction. I'm going to stop there, and then I'll save some more time for the Q&A, folks. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. Thank you so much for that update. So we're going to see how many questions we can get through in about a 10-minute period. So starting us off, this question is for Joe. Does the community bakery have backup capability?
It does not. In fact, the solar installation only provides about 12 to 15% of the amount of solar the community bakery uses, which is one of my motivations for trying to develop a remote site that we could get closer to 100%.
Thank you, Joe.
It's a very rare day when we put any kilowatt hours back on the grid because they're almost always fully consumed. The only days I ever saw that happen was when community bakery was closed for the day. It was bright sun outside, and it wasn't too hot that the air conditioning was running.
That's a good point. For Michael, and Michael, I answered this in the chat, but I think it's a good answer everyone should hear. Do you use your solar array for any hands-on educational opportunities for the students?
Yes, our partner Integrity has a curriculum called TRACK, and it's a K-12 curriculum. We use it with our math and science, and the math and science of solar energy is amazing, and it teaches our people how to use innovation and technology to the quality of their lives. Just like our canopy in our high school is over the loading zone, we have 600 feet of canopy, solar canopy that makes for shelter in our loading zones to our schools. So anytime we can take that curriculum and use it for our math and science and then relate it to hands-on real world experiences, we love it. Our partners also help train our teachers in how to teach the curriculum and what to teach.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Michael. This question is for anyone who can answer it because I don't think I'm the right one. How would you recommend a farming operation initiate solar into their operation?
In the southeast of Arkansas, there are farmers doing that now, and so someone should put you with it. I think some of the biggest farms there are down in southeast Delta are using it, so someone could hook you up with those folks.
Thanks again, Michael. And whoever sent that question in, if you'll email Thomas, whoever's email address up at the end, we'll try to put you in touch with some of those folks.
Let's see. To add real quick, sorry. So we partner with farmers across Arkansas for our native project, where farmers plant native forbs and grasses in row crop production. And a recent addition to that project for the last couple of years is actually putting their irrigation timers and other equipment on solar. So there's one small option there.
A question for Joe. Joe, how do you plan to use a community solar option? How would that program work?
Well, because of the way things are, Entergy requires things to be done now, what we had to do actually was go out and organize we pulled together 9 different electric users and basically brought all their electric bills to Entergy and said, okay, this is the group that we want to put together for a community solar center. And we had to identify a particular location, and we then had to pay Entergy to do a preliminary site review. And so we're basically, we had to put together the group on the front end. So we couldn't just build a community solar center and then go out there and try and find users. So that does make it a little bit more difficult, but that's how far we are. We have the users together. We have the initial approval from Entergy. We have the location. So now we need to just sort of build it and get it going.
Right. Thank you, Joe. This question is for Michael. At the school, are the students proud of their school for being in the forefront of alternative energy? And are the parents, are they supportive enough to become politically active on this issue?
Yes, I think our students, here's what happens with solar. You hear about rich people or projects on a house that maybe you don't ever get to see or anything. So one of the reasons we wanted the canopy was every day when those families and the public walked underneath them, they could see the innovation and be inspired. And so now It's like you pull up to an international airport in front of our school, and the pride they have with not only the appearance, but you'll hear them explaining what to other people, because if you're not looking up, they just think it's just a regular metal roof. Well, it's not. When they show them the translucent panels and start explaining, you can see the pride. And we even had, when we put this up, we had carloads of senior citizens coming on the weekends. We can see them on our cameras, and they're all coming through, and we've heard nothing but great. This was our surprise. Great things from our senior citizens, because number one, they love the green ideas, and number two, they see that the school is trying to take and make their tax dollars go further. And so the efficiency, the green ideas is totally appreciated by our community.
That's wonderful. That's good to hear, Michael. So let's see. The last question, and I think this may have been answered in the chat again, but it's a good one. How would House Bill 1787 affect the expansion of existing installations? This could, for Gary, I think.
Sorry, I double muted myself. It's unclear how it would talk about expanding existing installation, but it does expressly prohibit grandfathering after August of 2021. And I think you would likely see some of the utilities argue that if you materially changed your facility, that it would have to be, it would no longer be grandfathered. So that is a big concern.
I'll do one last call for questions in the chat box, or we can, Thomas, if you want to go ahead and start the call to action, we can answer some questions at the end if need be.
Perfect. That sounds great. Thank you, Brent. I'll just share my screen again real fast, but taking into account everything that we've just heard about threats to the Solar Access Act from House Bill 1787, it's going to be more important than ever now that we show support the state legislators for protecting the Solar Access Act. And the best way that you can do that, if you haven't yet, is by going ahead and signing the petition. That link should be in the chat there now. And then the next thing that we would ask folks to do on this call is to text the petition or email, depending on your preference, to 10 friends who are also supportive of Solar Access, and help reach a necessary number of petition signers to influence state legislators and protect the fantastic progress on solar that has been made in the last couple of years from rollback attempts. And it's especially important to reach people around the state so that there are petition signers in each key legislative district. As Gary mentioned, this bill, HB 1787, is going to be in the House Insurance and Commerce Committee, and we want to be sure to reach those members. So if you have friends or family in other parts of Arkansas, definitely send the petition their way. And if all of us were to do this right now on this call, that would be 600 plus additional people who would sign the petition if we all sent it to 10 friends, so we could make a big impact that way. And definitely share in the chat when you've signed the petition and sent it to friends. And then one other way that you can contribute to these efforts is we have a letter for small businesses to sign on in support of solar access. That link should be in the chat as well shortly. If you yourself own a small business that would like to sign on in support of protecting the Solar Access Act, or if you know others who would want to sign on, that is the link where you can do that. And this is another way to show the state legislature that there's widespread support from the business community as well for maintaining solar access, for keeping that in place, and also hopefully for building on the potential for solar in the state with some of those additional positive pieces of legislation that Gary mentioned just a few minutes ago. So we'll give a couple minutes now for folks to take those actions. We've got a sample text that you can send to friends or family shared in the chat just now from Lauren there. And then if folks have additional questions for the panelists, we can come back to those now.
Thank you so much, Thomas. And just while we're waiting for any questions to come in or for folks to text their friends, just a big virtual round of applause. I've got to thank our panel today, Michael, Joe, Uta, and Gary. Thank you all so much for being a part of this today. Your stories are what matters. For some of us policy nerds, it's easy to get stuck in the mud of different bills and texts being introduced, but seeing how good conservation policy affects folks on the ground is invaluable. So I really appreciate your time today.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
All right, Master of Ceremonies, Thomas, if you want to take us out.
Unless there are any other final questions, we can wrap up this this meeting here with a big final round of virtual applause for our panelists. Thank you all so much for joining us, and definitely be in touch if you'd like to get involved. I shared my email in the chat before, or we can be in touch if you go ahead and share that petition. So thank you all again so much for joining us this evening, and have a wonderful rest of your Thursday.